All right, Kevin, we are live.
Everybody, welcome back. I'm going to pick up right where we left off. So today, I've had a little bit of time to think about what I was doing the last time I worked, kind of where the time got eaten up working on the gun, right? The gun took 2 hours, and then the rest of what got done took like 45 minutes. And so kind of just working through what I did and what kind of ate up the time and how to avoid that as we move forward. I'm expecting to be able to knock out the whole figure tonight and the mountain range in the background. And I'd like to even scribble in the shadows and the rocks. The shadows and the rocks don't require any detail. They're just literally scribbles. They'll take me 5 minutes. They're not meant to be details. They're not going to do anything but generally fill in spaces where I have my drawings for shadows. That way I can paint just the lights on the rocks when I do go to finish them. But I'm going to stay away from the skin, so I'm not going to paint the head or the hands, but I'm going to try to knock out all of the armor today. Like I said, and that mountain range in the background if I can. It's the same colors. I'm using exactly what I did last time, so I just covered this so that it stayed wet, and should be pretty straightforward. The arm is probably the most complex part of this because there are some highlights on here that are outside of the range of what I've built. So I'm going to reserve the arm for a little bit later. I want to get into an area where I can really kind of move the paint around quickly and make sure that I've got some momentum before I hit something that's going to potentially slow me down. So I'll probably do in here, and then I'll start the leg. I'll work across, get down in here, and then jump in and do the arm. Just want to make sure, like doing the arm, I'm not going to be able to rest my hand. So I do want to make sure that I can get in here and work, feel comfortable dangling my hand over this wet area. And this feels pretty comfortable to me, so I'm not worried. If that didn't feel comfortable, I probably would have gotten stuck maybe doing a little bit of this down in here, leaving this empty so I could rest my hand and work. But I'm feeling pretty good. When I did this last week and I was building in the lights, they were kind of sinking in as I was working. And so they were a little bit more, you can see in the image, the photograph, you can see they're a little bit more pronounced. I'm going to build them up more, not today. Next week after I've got everything in, all of the uniform in, I'm going to start bringing up some of these things so that it feels illuminated. Like I don't want it to feel like this is just all in shadows. I want to make sure that even from a few feet away, this stuff reads. And I'll be able to show you how that works. It's very simple. I'm just going to work very thinly on top of what's already down. I don't even really need the photo reference for that. I'm just going to pick and choose where I want to accent, and I'll just build that stuff up. So I want to start by, again, figuring out what's going on in here and how the value range of what's in here connects to what I've already done up above. Got one little piece of a belt out here, which is outside of the range of everything else. But otherwise, I should be able to work probably between these 3 shades and not need anything else for the day. That's the hope. So, let's see. So it's skinned over. I don't want to break into it and open it all up because I want this paint to last another week just in case I need it. So I'm just going to kind of break away a small section so I can get access to the wet inside and pull the wet paint out here. Just kind of move the paint around and make sure that it's pliable, that I don't need to put oil in it and thin it down. I think we're okay. Okay, the paint can stiffen up when it sits like this. It can stiffen up, but I'm feeling like it's okay. So I'm going to get in. I'm going to start just dropping in these shadows.
Awesome. Well, hey, Kevin, I'm just going to give us a little intro here. Welcome, everybody. This is Daniel speaking right now, Daniel Folta. We'll just be with you guys in the chat here. So if you're new, welcome. We're glad to have you. And If anyone who doesn't know Evolve yet, Evolve, we just train artists to get pro-level skills in about 1 year, and we have a complete training program that you can check out in the links below. But this live stream is just a great place to get painting advice from Kevin, our master, watching him paint in real time, and you can ask us any questions that you have. All right, back to you, Kevin.
Okay, so, and again, I said this last week, and this is always going to be the case. When you first start an area, your first value, when you start putting it down, it takes a little bit of time to figure out where everything goes. Once the first value is down, everything should flow very quickly from there, because you define where your shadows are. Like, I have to make sense of a drawing here that's not really clean any longer. Some of these lines, they're buried, they're lost underneath the initial paint that I put down. So I'm having to figure out what my intent was when I made the lines as I go at the beginning. Eventually, once I have these things down, this initial value, I will know exactly where everything else goes relative to these initial marks. So getting these in, taking my time and making sure that they're going exactly where they're supposed to go is very important. So I'm in no rush. I'm in no rush to get that done, because I know that the pace is going to pick up dramatically once this is done, but only if it's done right. And so I want to make sure that I'm not getting ahead of myself on this and pushing too far and embedding mistakes which are going to create problems for me later on. And that's always the case. We always want to take our time. If you take your time and you're methodical while you work, you'll find the paintings go pretty quickly because you're never going back to do repair work. And that's very important. Repair work takes forever, right? And if you do it right the first time, and again, with this approach, right? But if you do it right the first time, you get it done. You might move a little bit slower in the process, but then you don't wind up having to go back and fix. And that will save you a ton of time. Again, just trying to figure out what these marks were intended to be.
So to clarify, Kevin, you're hitting the darkest value right now?
I'm hitting the darkest value to start. We always want to do that, right? The value of the board will function to hold the place of all of the lights. Because when I put the darkest value down, it holds the place of the darkest things, and everything else that I would be painting would be lighter. And since the board is lighter, it basically holds the place and shows me if the shapes are right. Right? And normally we would be painting shadows first, but this is it's a little bit hard to read. What's a shadow? What's a dark light? And because there are no really bright lights in here. Everything is dark. It's all at the low end of the value spectrum. And so I'm just trying to figure out value to value, but I'm trying to get the darkest thing in first. And it's a range. It's not one value. It's maybe 2 or 3 values. And I'm trying to put them in with this one value and kind of solidify them. And then I'll work all the lights around it. But the board will hold the place of the lights once I get the shadows in. I'll be able to see if all the shapes look right. I really just take my time on this. Patience is a necessity when you're doing something like this. Any landmark in here that'll help to inform me as to what my intent was when I made the initial marks. Again, because a lot of these lines, they're not visible. So I'm having to figure out, based on the lines that I can see, the marks that are visible, where the marks that are missing belong. A little bit at a time. And as I always say, I want to work with the largest brush that fits. I want to work with a tiny little brush if I don't need to. They're slow and they force you to think in details, which I don't need at the moment. I need to think in much broader marks at the beginning of the painting process. And so I don't want to get locked into this kind of minute thinking early. I find that if you use a small brush, you think small. And if you use a large brush, you think large. And at the beginning, large is what we want. We want big overarching decisions to be made.
Got a question for you, Kevin.
Yes.
This actually came from someone commenting on our YouTube channel.
Yes.
And I thought it would be a great place for you to answer, open up a discussion here. So this is from Mark Z. He said, I'm an oil painter myself, but I'm just curious. It seems with the advent of digital art, that has to create a ton of competition for traditional painters. Have you noticed that?
Well, in some venues, right? So you know, from a traditional, if you start looking at the comparison between the two and where they might compete, illustration, yeah, absolutely. A company would much rather, in most cases, have a digital image because they're easy to correct. So they can send it back to the artist a dozen times for minor changes, and it's built in layers and it's easy. Change the background and make it green. So it's very easy. A couple of shortcuts on Photoshop, and all of your layers are now a little bit greener. And now it's a green image instead of a blue one, or a red one instead of an orange one, right? And they can play with it like that. It's also quicker to work digitally. So once you know what you're doing, right? And so if you make a mistake, you just back out of it, where in paint, it can be much more problematic. So from a commercial standpoint, yeah, I mean, you're gonna be hard pressed as a traditional painter to compete with the digital guys. But if you're good, you're good. If you've got traditional skills and you wanna paint, there's work out there for you, but you are competing with people who can work a lot faster and offer a lot more versatility in the corrective process, where as a painter, the people you would be working with know that you have limits where that's concerned. I can't change this background to make it green. I'm stuck with blue at this point. Now, they could go in digitally and make the change, but they don't want to do the work, right? That's your job if you're the one taking the work. But on the other side of it, people don't want to hang a printed digital file on their wall if they're buying fine art. So if you're buying fine art, traditional original stuff is what they want, right? So the advantages that the digital guys have in the illustration realm, the traditional people have in the collector's realm, right? And that actually matters, right? Because most people these days are going to school for digital, which means it has hollowed out the number of artists doing traditional work. You'd be hard pressed to find schools that are teaching traditional painting as anything more than a stepping stone to the digital realm, because that's where the market is, at least that's how the schools see it. And so as a fine artist, if you're doing traditional work, yes, you may not really have access to illustration, or there would be a real challenge if you did, but all of the competitions in the digital realm, you're not fighting with those people, regardless of how talented they may be. You're not fighting with them for work. You're only competing against the other traditional guys in the gallery scene, if you're doing portrait work for private clients, like all of the fine art end of things. And the truth is, the fine art end of it is much better than the commercial end, because you get to be creative on your own. There are some real benefits to working in that industry. The difference is that, like, if you work for a gallery, you do paintings, you don't know if you're going to get paid until the show opens and they sell them. If you do portrait work, then you know you're being paid before you start working. All illustration, you know you're getting paid before you ever do any labor, right? And so depending on which end of the fine art industry you're in, it's similar as far as knowing where your money is coming from and that it's guaranteed before you start working, right? Portraiture or illustration. But then on the fine art front, you're basically taking your chances along with the gallery that what you produce is going to be of interest to their clientele and they're going to be able to sell them to make the show worthwhile for both you and the gallery. But again, it's like they're not people who are doing digital work aren't necessarily competition in every corner of the industry, and because so many people are doing the digital stuff, you have a much smaller number. As the older traditional painters kind of move on, they can't paint anymore, or they pass away. The number of traditional painters is diminishing. And again, art, like with everything else, is supply and demand. If you only have one person who can make portraits, they name their price, right? And so the smaller the number of portrait painters, the more control you have over your piece of the market if you can get in. And of course, it's all contingent on being good enough to corner a portion of the market for yourself. But that's regardless of whether or not you're digital or traditional. That's a great question, though.
Yeah, definitely. The nameless subscriber, love that username, just shared, but traditional is so much more beautiful, and something about being able to reach out and touch and see the texture makes it so much more appealing, and it also has a more hands-on skill set.
I gotta tell you, I have seen digital art, I've seen a ton of digital art that is absolutely riveting. It's stunning, it is gorgeous. And even a print of that work, it would be worthy of a gallery wall. It doesn't have collectible value, which is why it's not going to wind up in galleries, but there are a lot of really gifted artists producing some incredible stuff. A lot of it is in the realm of fantasy. And a lot of these artists, they're not even working for publishers. What they're doing is they're developing their own work and selling it themselves. Whatever they need to do to make a living, doing what they love. And it's like I said, I mean, some of the stuff is just, I mean, it's beautiful. It's as beautiful as any traditional painting. Not everybody, but there are a good number of people out there, and a lot of them are young. They're in their 20s. They've grown up into this technology, and they've got a really solid grasp on it. Again, beautiful art is beautiful art. It's not like one's better than another. Like appreciating the highest quality in any genre, any style, any medium. It's a good thing to do. And like I said, there is some incredibly good digital art out there. Just like I said, I mean, beautiful. I'm not interested in digital work and working digitally. I like the tactile sensation. I like the original painting. I have a bias. I grew up with this, right? I came up with this. I didn't have the other option. But I don't think one is better than the other. Skill is skill. The ability to deliver something that inspires, something that's so beautiful that you remember it long after you've stopped looking at it. You don't need paint to do that. You might prefer paint. Beautiful art is beautiful art, and you should definitely appreciate it for that. As I'm doing this, I'm trying to remember the lessons of last week. What kept me so slow up in here and how I was able to speed things up. So I'm keeping that in mind as I'm working so I don't step into that trap again. Definitely not a place I want to be. I want to move through this painting judiciously. I'd like to get all of this figure done tonight in that mountain range, because I'm trying to get the painting completed after tonight, hopefully 2 more weeks. That's the goal at the moment, if it can be managed. That requires no major hiccups along the way. Yeah, my transfer marks don't describe everything. In fact, they describe a very small amount of the information that's going on here. And so I'm having to figure out what my intent was as I was putting all of these marks down, when I was picking and choosing which marks to place and which ones to ignore. So I'm having to make sense of that. Often enough here in the school, what people will do is they'll keep their transfer image so they can go and look at the lines and see where they are over the photograph. And that helps to answer the question for them. They don't have to think too much. I'm not partial to that. I like to solve the problem here while I'm working. It forces me to think and engage the image more instead of having the answers kind of spoon-fed to me. It does take a little bit longer, but as I work, I'm able to make more sense of things. It connects me to the work.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Got a comment here. I've never used oil paints. What are the pros and cons compared to acrylics?
Well, acrylics have severe limitations compared to oil. Oil, first of all, oil stays wet a long time, so it allows for lots of manipulation of the material long after it goes down, right? And so, paintings, when you're painting, your values and your colors, they're all relative. Everything is relative. What's over here is relative to what's here and here and here. Everything is related. And so with oil paint, you can actually build out the relationships and manipulate them wet into wet to establish the feeling of the painting that you want, where with acrylic, you basically put something down and then you put the next thing down and everything's kind of drying as you go. You don't have the time to kind of play with it. You have to remix and then overpaint, and oil paint gives you a little bit more flexibility in that. Definitely, you can manipulate acrylic to look like oil, but it's a lot of work. You really have to know what you're doing. I have a couple of friends who do illustration, and their acrylic paintings look like oil paintings. They work in oil also. But I would say that if you really know what you're doing, you could move back and forth between them seamlessly. The pigments are the same. It's mostly drying time that's the issue. And glazing is another, where oil paint, you build a suspension because you're using an oil and it dries and the pigment's kind of floating in it when it dries. Acrylic paint, the medium is water. And so when it dries, it evaporates and everything kind of loses its thickness. And so you kind of lose ground on that. There may be mediums at this point for acrylic paint that approximate what oil paint does in a glaze. I don't know. I imagine there probably is. But if you have the choice to work with oil paint, which does the things, naturally, or work with acrylic paint and bend it and twist it to do what oil paint does, it makes more sense to just take the easier path and work with oil. There is a bit of a learning curve on oil, like there is with everything. So it's not like you can just seamlessly jump from acrylic into oil. You would have to get a sense of how it works. Because the paint does stay wet, it's easy to create mud, everything to become neutralized into the things next to it. But that stuff is all, that's easy to get around if you're just given a quick breakdown of how oil paint works. And again, most of the stuff, so in painting, gradients are what create elegance. And oil paint naturally allows for that, where acrylic paint doesn't. And again, you can manipulate the acrylic paint to get it to do that, but again, you're now taking it out of its natural state in order to do it, where oil paint in its natural state does it. So, but I see people produce beautiful acrylic paintings all the time, right? You work with whatever is comfortable, and if the paint that you're working with, if the material is limited and it's holding you back, then you go and look for something else. But if you're working with acrylic and you don't feel like you're being held back by the limitations of the material, then it doesn't really matter if the material is limited, if it's not able to do things that oil paint does, right? It's a comfort level. And are you getting the quality result that you want, right? That's always the bottom line. If you're getting the result, what does it matter if there's a better material or if a lot of people prefer a different material? As long as you can get the result that you intend, you're good to go. No reason to think past that. I would say from the standpoint of selling art, within the traditional world, oil paint has a status that acrylic doesn't. In the modern art world, it doesn't make a difference. But in traditional art, oil paint is a traditional medium. It matters to people. Just like working on linen, on a stretched linen with oil, to a collector sounds better than working on a wood panel with acrylic, right? It's because you're dealing in old time-tested materials. Acrylic paint's not even been around that long. Oil paint has been around forever, since the 1400s, I think. So people know when they buy an oil painting, they know that it's going to endure. As long as the artist knows what they're doing, the painting's going to last forever, right? And that matters if you're spending money. If you're buying a piece of artwork and it costs and it's expensive, it has a substantial price tag on it, you want to know that that painting's not going to start disintegrating on your wall when you get it home, right? And so time-tested materials do that. They ensure, because we know what happens. We can see these paintings on the walls of museums that are hundreds and hundreds of years old. We know the condition they're in. We can see it with our own eyes. There's an education out there to be had for how to restore the work. Again, new products, they have to figure out first, time has to show us what's wrong with those materials. And then once we figure out what's wrong, how they break down, what their shortcomings are, and that takes time. They can test these things in a lab, but it's not the same as being tested in the real world. The real world has all kinds of things going on in it that a laboratory doesn't. And so once they figure out the shortcomings of a medium, you've then got to raise an entire generation of restoration artists who can fix those problems, assuming that they're fixable. Right? And so a lot of traditional guys won't go near new materials. I've got a lot of friends like that. They won't go near a material if it's not been used for hundreds of years. Right? So a medium like an alkyd, they won't touch because they've only been around for like 30 years. So linseed oil, that's it, nothing else. I don't go that far. I have a belief that if my work is worth saving later on, the materials that I'm working are mainstream. They're mainstream materials from reputable companies. There will be restoration people to fix my paintings if they're worthy of that attention later on. And so I don't worry about that. I try to follow the rules as best I can to create something that's archival. I'm thoughtful about the materials that I use. But again, there are materials that are around that just they've not been around long enough to say that they're time tested. And so I won't shy away from them as long as they're coming from good companies. I don't even remember what the original question was. I feel like I got so far away from that.
We were just comparing oil paint and acrylic. But actually, Kevin, our palette camera actually just went down on us, so I'm going to go over and I'm going to check it out. Just know that you're going to be on camera, and I'll be taking care of that for us.
You forget to plug it in. We have so many wires and cables and everything around here. We forgot to plug it in.
Sorry about that.
I'm finding in here I completely left out this metal clip in my transfer, so I'm going to have to place that in here.
Kevin,
Yes.
would you say that watercolor has the same level of status as acrylic when it comes to like museums and
Acrylic?
fine art?
Acrylic or oil?
Well, which one would you say does it compare closest to?
I think it's closer to oil in status. It's been around a really long time, and it's a very particular skill set to be able to work with it. It's a challenging medium. To be able to control it, that's you've got to have real skill to be able to do that. I've been asked why I don't work with watercolor, and my answer is always that it's too challenging a medium. Like I do this for a living. The last thing I want to do is be overly challenged for no reason. It just doesn't make any sense. You know, I'd rather make it easy for myself so that I can make a living. And so watercolor is too easy. You can do everything right and in one moment ruin a painting. Just 5 hours, 20 hours in, whatever it is, and just one little drop, and now you've got a mess on your hands. That never happens with oil paint. That's never an issue. So for me, sticking with a medium that is really arguably kind to the practitioner, I think that's important to me. Like I said, I mean, most people, a lot of artists, when they're coming up, they think that oil paint is like you do watercolor, then acrylic, then oil. Like, if you can wash it off with water, it must be made for children. It must be an amateur material, but it's not the case. But a lot of people, we kind of come up that way because when we're kids, what do? We work with watercolor, and we do that because it's easy to clean, right? We're not, at 7 years old, we're not handed oil paint because, like, that would be a disaster. Not the paintings, but just the mess. And so it's easy to get this idea that watercolor, because we use it as children, that it's a lower grade material. But it's a tough medium to work with to produce beautiful work. Out of respect for anybody who can produce clean professional work in watercolor. It's not easy. And of course, that being said, there are videos out there of me saying that when people ask me why I don't use these other mediums like watercolor, I'm on the record in a few places jokingly saying, if you can wash it off with water, it's made for children. And I am a professional. I paint with adult materials. But yeah, watercolor is tough. And again, I feel myself getting bogged down in a bunch of details here, forcing myself to move quickly through them and make some marks that generally describe what I'm seeing so I can get away from this paint and into the next value. And I don't want to get bogged down like I did last week. It's 2 hours on a belt. It would be easy to do. It'd be very easy to do. So I'm paying attention to the pace that I'm working. And if I feel like I'm starting to crawl, I kind of wake myself up.
Got a question from Kelly.
Yes.
I have a painting that the person wants on a stained piece of wood. Can you gesso over that, or would you suggest sanding it down or painting over the stain? Thank you.
You've got to sand it. You would have to sand that down, like get it back down to the raw wood, and then you can find videos on how to prep a panel. It's not difficult. The materials are readily available. But yeah, I wouldn't work over something that's varnished, something that's urethaned or stained. I would sand it down to the raw wood and then go from there. Again, anything that everything that sits between the wood and the painting potentially delaminates, cracks, peels away. You don't want to put your painting at risk that way. And so take all of it out, get it all out of the equation right from the beginning before you start working, so you don't have to contend with it. So in here, I'm finding lots and lots of little things going on. They're not easy to read, and so the values are so close together. The edges are kind of lost and found along the way, and so I'm not trying to paint them in great detail. I'm trying to basically mimic the lack of information that's here while not making it feel flat. So I'm basically creating something impressionistic in this area. And again, I'm almost done with this shade, and then I should be able to roll through it with my red, and then just build it up with a little bit of a highlight in a few places. I say highlight, but it's actually really dark. And then be moving on to the next area. So I'm actually moving at a pretty good pace right now. I'm not too worried about the way the day is going at this point. It feels like it's moving along nicely. To be thoughtful of how everything feels as I'm working, if I feel like I'm moving quickly or not. I want to make sure that I feel like I'm moving.
Hey, Kevin, you'll appreciate this comment. What is this reference from? It seems familiar, like a movie or a game I've seen.
You know what? It's actually just a photo shoot that I did with my daughter. So it's designed to look like a book cover or a movie poster. The idea of this painting is to give people an idea of how a book cover or a movie poster might be painted. And again, they're not all done the way I'm doing this. But this is definitely the way a book cover could be done. When I was a commercial illustrator, this is how, by and large, this is how I worked. So it gives everybody some insight into how something like this is done, right? And that's the whole idea of this particular piece that we're working on, is to give people some insight, let you get an idea of what the workload is to produce something like this, kind of, look behind the curtain. So I'm feeling pretty good about this shade going down. The paint is a little gummier than it was last week, and so I am having to contend with that. I don't want to thin it. I like it I don't want to thin it and start to see it become semi-see-through. I want to try to avoid that. So I'm working with it being a little bit gummier. I'm just accepting that. Trying to be thoughtful of the paint as I pick it up, how much I'm picking up. It could potentially become an issue for me. It's down too thick, it becomes hard to create gradients. It's hard to blend things. So I want to make sure that I'm not causing any problems for myself.
Question for you, Kevin.
Yeah.
If this painting is an illustration, what defines a fine art painting? I'm not sure I know the difference.
You know what? I can make the argument that there's no difference except how you sell it, how you market it. It's a great science fiction illustrator. His name is Donato Giancola. One of the great. He's alive today, so he's my age. But just an incredible fantasy illustrator. He moved out of illustration into fine art, painting exactly the same paintings. He changed the scale, made them a little bit bigger, but he's just making his own paintings, but he's got a clientele that buy them. So he's technically a fine artist now, but he's painting exactly the same paintings in the same style with the same skills. So it's how the stuff goes out the door. Does it get published? Well, then you're an illustrator. Does it go to somebody's house and go up on a wall? Then you're a fine artist, right? So it's just a little bit of language, but the skills are the same, right? You could make, like, if you ask people like Norman Rockwell, you think about his paintings, was he a fine artist? They sell his work as fine art, and it brings in a lot of money. I mean, he's in galleries, and people hang his paintings in their homes. It's fine art. But every one of those paintings, every one of them, was a commercial illustration. So, it's just words, illustration, fine art. It's mostly what determines the label we put on it is just what it's used for. If it's used for commercial purposes, it's an illustration, and if it's not, it's fine art. But it could be the same painting. Doesn't really make that much of a difference.
Back to the comment about the reference.
Yes.
They said, if that's your daughter, you can tell her that she has the looks of a famous actress. I kept racking my brain trying to think of her name in the movies I've seen her in.
Oh, okay. She's probably watching. If you think of who that is, I'm sure she'd love to know. So now I'm basically fine tuning and getting all these darks in where I feel like I did some drawing with the brush, and now I'm kind of trying to figure out what's three-dimensional and what's not. Trying to remember what this belt looks like, if it's actually three-dimensional, if it's kind of flat with little cutouts. Trying to make sure that I'm kind of squaring everything off so it feels mechanical in nature rather than organic. Right? If they're oddly spaced and they're not squared off, they're going to look organic. And organic is not what armor or this kind of stuff would be. It would be machine cut. So I need to make sure that I'm giving that impression with the kinds of edges that I'm using here. Right? And I'll be able to clean it up further when I put the light down. I just want to make sure I've got all of my darker shades in place. As if I can help it, to not come back to this shade once I'm done.
Evan, I've got a question from the legendary Noob.
Okay.
Does the alla prima technique make paintings look flatter or less vivid compared to paintings done in layers over time? Or does it totally depend on the artist and his or her skills?
It really depends on the artist and their skills. So years and years and years ago, there were limited colors, so you could have a palette, but maybe you needed a color that was a transparent in order to create a glaze that would give you this luminous feel, but the color didn't exist. They couldn't find a pigment that gave that to you that they could make translucent. But today, they can make it chemically. And so the number of colors that are available to us to paint alla prima, to paint opaquely, you can create an impression almost as vibrant as a glaze. So in the hands of an artist that really knows what they're doing, glazing or working opaquely makes no difference. It really doesn't. You can polish the surface of a painting and make it glow without ever putting down a glaze if you know what you're doing. And a lot of illustrators do that. The quality of, unless you've seen what a professional illustration looks like in oil paint, you cannot imagine how vibrant the paintings are. They almost look like they're illuminated by an electrical, like you look from the back of the painting for a plug, because it must be plugged into the wall. It feels like there's light being generated from the painting itself. But that's a skill. That's a skill that the painter has. Again, these days, because there are so many different colors, anything that you would need that didn't exist before, that you would have had to have glazed in order to get that luminosity, can now be produced with an actual color that's opaque. It's a good question. But yeah, it's just technology. Technology has bent that curve. And as I'm doing this, like this edge, where it touches what's already down, I want to make sure that I'm marrying it. I'm pulling some of this up into the darks just to make sure that it is seamless. It would be nothing worse than me letting this thing dry and then finding out these don't feel connected. So I've got to make sure that I'm dragging this and placing it in some of the shadows to connect these two things together. And not a lot of work, it just takes a couple of moments, but I have to do it if I want to make sure, if I want to guarantee that these two different things painted on different days are going to be able to marry. I mean, I know the colors and the values are right because it's the same paint, but I want to make sure that I'm connecting it here. I might have some contaminated shade of black up in here, and so by dragging my black that I'm using right now into that a little bit, I connect them with the exact same color and value. When I say contaminated, I kind of softened and blended a little bit of this last week, and so there's real potential that the original, the really dark shade that I started with doesn't exist in the painting the way that I originally mixed it. And so by doing this, I'm dragging some of this original shade in its pure form and connecting what I'm painting now into the thing that was painted last week. And it just helps to guarantee or give me better odds of not having to go back and do work to stitch these things together later. Good, so I'm now moving on to my next shade. I'm gonna just fill everything that's not filled, except for a little bit out here where the light's really bright. Right, I'm not gonna worry about, well, actually, as I'm doing it, I'm going to address the edges. I was gonna say I'm gonna go around and just lay this in, let everything be a sharp edge, but I'm actually not going to. I'm gonna blend my edges as I go. And all I'm doing, these values are so close together, I can just rub the edge and they'll blend. I'm very thoughtful about what is a sharp edge and what is a gradient. I don't want to just blend everything, and I don't want to have sharp edges where I need to have a gradient that describes form. So I want to be very careful about that. One more value that'll go on top of this when it's done, and that'll help to pull out some of the stronger lights. Try not to let these shadows sink in too deeply. Like back in here, this is a shadow, but I want to make sure I'm getting some illumination in it. I don't want it to just be a black hole in the painting. Again, this should move pretty quickly. Like I said, I just have to get these areas filled, make sure I'm not leaving any of the blue from the background showing through, and then manage some edges. The shade that I put down next, I'll be able to pull out any of the, like what you think of as details, any of the sharp edges I'll be able to pull out with the next value, like I did up in here.
Got another question for you.
Yes.
Have you ever done a painting from a transfer only to find it has gone sideways and you have to figure out where it is wrong?
Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time. You kind of go on autopilot and fall asleep at the wheel, and then you kind of wake up realizing that you've not been paying attention and you've kind of lost a drawing. You look, even here, I lost a drawing. I've had to figure out where a lot of this stuff goes. And had I been a little bit more thoughtful early on, that would not have happened, and I wouldn't have to figure it out at this point. This would be happening much faster because my lines would be obvious. But yeah, but if that happens, like it's your image, you just figure out where the stuff goes. You take your time, right? It's not a big deal. You just sit back and relax and work your way through it. Nothing worse than getting all like fired up over it, like, oh, I can't believe I lost my drawing, or something's out of place. And you take your time, you can figure it out. I mean, if you can make a painting like this, you can surely figure out if something's not where it belongs. But you have to look it over. You're not just going to glance at the painting and know what it is. You got to take your time and really look the piece over and search for what doesn't make sense. Right? And it's the same skill you use when you're searching the photograph, looking to figure out what value or what color and where the paint goes and what kind of edge you're managing. right? It's the same exact skill, it's just perception. I'm gonna look at the painting until I find what is wrong, what is out of place, and then at that point I will then try to formulate a plan to repair it. And I'll just keep doing that until the painting comes back in line. And that happens. And there are tricks to doing it also if you really wind up with a mess. I mean, there are tricks. You can always just, start it over. I don't mean the whole painting, but you can kind of cover over an area, let it dry, and then do another transfer right on top of it, or do a section, right? Let's say I messed up this hand. I lost the hand entirely, and I was too nervous to just draw it in and paint it. I could actually just fill it with something neutral and let it dry, and then I could get a new transfer of this girl and cut out around her so I lay it down exactly on top of her, and then retrace the handle, put the hand right back where it belongs. As long as my outer edge is faithful to the original transfer, the hand will go exactly where it belongs. I'll now have all my lines again. Right, and so there are ways of cheating in that, if you want. I say cheating, it's not cheating, it's just figuring out a way of getting that stuff back in place without having to do the actual calculations for yourself, without having to treat it like it's a drawing, but get back to a transfer. Right? I mean, a lot of these things, and it's just about being a little creative. You could do it with a projector. There's lots of ways, and it's like, as you do this kind of work and you learn the tools that are available for getting transfers done and that type of stuff, you might find one that's perfect for that kind of a problem. And so if you ever run into that problem, you tap that tool for that thing. But again, the best tool is your eyes. And, if you've developed your skills, you should be able to just sit down and calmly draw the thing in, or just block it in paint and kind of manipulate the shape until it feels right. And then once you've got that, then go in and detail it, right? You don't do the details first. You need to block it in and make sense of it first, make sure it's the right size, the right shape, that the color and value you're choosing is correct, right? If I put that hand in, I would know very quickly if I just blocked in the shape. I would know pretty quickly whether or not it was correct. It would either look too big or clumsy, or the angle would be funny. It wouldn't look like the hand was against the butt on the gun. Like it would look out of place. And so I would see that and I would have to then make corrections for it. There's a lot of information around it to tell me where it goes also. It's not like it's in a vacuum. There's all kinds of details in here that would tell me, like, where this finger is relative to all these little ribs on the gun, right? There's lots of information in here, and I can figure out using that. But again, the big thing is you want to have a full skill set as an artist so that you don't have to lean on your transfer as heavily. If you lose the transfer, no big deal. If the painting gets a little bit off the rails, it doesn't rattle you. You just, okay, well, I got to go in. I got to do a little bit of drawing now. I got to refine what I've lost, and that it doesn't unnerve you to have to do that. You know that that you have the confidence that all you need to do is commit a little bit of time, and you'll be exactly where you need to be, and that's it. It's not a matter of the painting is now at risk because you lost something in the transfer. If you're at that point, you're probably not a pro, right? A pro has to be able to fix a painting on the fly as they're working. If something doesn't work out, it's like you can have all the shortcuts, but you really need to be able to depend on your own skill to be able to pull that stuff together, because sometimes that's what it needs. It just needs you and your eyes and your brain tackling the problem. Again, a lot of this it's more confidence than skill, to be honest. Like you have to have an understanding of how these things work, but like placing that hand wouldn't be that hard. It's not a very complex shape. If you look at it, right, you can figure out maybe the height of it and the width of it are about the same. They can see this palette?
Yeah.
So like the height of it and the width of it are about the same. And then once you have that, it's not straight up and down, it's on a bit of an angle, so you can kind of change the angle. And then the fingers are up in here. They kind of come up on an angle like this. And then the other finger kind of protrudes and cuts across, right? And so even if this is an imperfect hand, right, and I'm just kind of doodling, right? Even if it's an imperfect hand, boy, it really gets the ball rolling in order to get it established. And you got 3 fingers in here, right? And now I'm already starting to establish the hand. Now I can go in and fix it, manipulate it until it comes into line. But it's just a matter of figuring it out. And again, I can use my photograph. If I square it to the canvas, I can check with the angle on this and make sure the angle is right. I can check the angle of this finger and make sure it's right. And I can construct, not draw the hand, but construct it piece by piece from the data that I can extract from here, right? And it's like drawing it is different than constructing it. Drawing it means you sit down and you draw. Constructing it means you're calculating the angle of this, the angle of this. How wide is this, or how tall is this compared to how wide is this, right? You can take measurements, the height of the hand against the width of the hand, right? You can get these things and you can make sense of it. And so you're constructing rather than drawing. And it's almost data. You extract data from here and apply it here. You just have to make sure that each piece of data is correct before you move it over. That's all. But that's a confidence game, right? And the more you do, the more confident you become. You get successes, you become more confident, right? And there's nothing worse as an artist, like when you're working, and I can tell you from experience, because I've been there, when something doesn't go right and you don't have the confidence to just do something about it, I mean, it just, it rattles your nerves, makes you question if you actually know what you're doing. You know, and so when you're learning how to make art, being able to do this stuff from direct observation is critical, because that's the skill you use to figure out where the hand goes and the direction, the angle. So you want to make sure you have that piece of the puzzle in your toolbox. You don't have to be extraordinary at it, but you have to have the basic fundamental skill, right? You don't have to be able to paint, life-size portraits from life, but you do have to be able to look at something and see the proportions and see the angles and how the light and the shadow move across it, make sense of it, and be able to get your hand to approximate it on canvas or on paper, right? And as long as you can do that with something, it doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't have to be anything overly complex. As long as you do it with something, a ball, a can, a cone, you feel confident that when you look at something carefully enough, you can figure out what the proportions are. A hand is just a bunch of little cylinders. There's not much to it if you think of it that way. And so how big are the cylinders? What are the directions they're moving? What are the angles on them? Not so hard to figure out if you have the fundamental skill. And again, it always comes back to the fundamentals. It's not some special skill, and it doesn't have to be highly developed even. It helps if it is, but it's just like if it's not highly developed, it just takes you longer to resolve it. To resolve the problem. Somebody who has the skill that's more developed will be able to see these things with greater ease. And so they can look, they'll see the issue, they'll be able to make the drawing and move on. Where somebody who hasn't got the skill well developed but understands how it works will take some time and they'll be second guessing some of the things that they think they're seeing, but eventually they'll get it in place if they're patient with themselves. And that's another one. You've got to be patient. When things aren't going right, the worst thing to do is to start to get agitated and irritated and start rushing, which is what we do. We start throwing everything we have at the problem instead of slowing it down and calculating. Because it like I said, it chips away at our confidence, and nobody likes the way that feels. But then what we do usually is we double down on that. We double down on that and we make it worse because we get emotional about it. And so.
Well, that was a nice little roll there, Kevin.
Yeah.
So much that I want to add to that conversation, but I'm just thinking, which pieces do I pick up and keep the conversation going? I think, the fundamentals.
Did I answer the original question?
Yeah, of course. Do you remember what it was? It was about the transfer drawing.
Oh. Oh, that all applied.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and actually I included this in my video playlist about the fundamentals where, and you're talking about these fundamentals, how they're essential. We teach that there's values, edges, and color, and maybe we can get into that, but perception is the term that we use to describe the skill you're developing when you are developing like your ability to draw, which is really, perception is really seeing things in relation to each other. And that actually goes beyond just drawing. It's the relationships of your values, the relationships of your edges, of your colors. And so that perception skill, which really gets developed on a neurological way, right, Kevin?
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that like the whole Evolve program was really like you designed it with that specific fundamental in mind. Like,
yes,
you didn't throw people straight into drawing immediately, because that requires a certain level of development of that skill already. You started people off with painting squares and starting to see the differences between values and understanding, a soft edge versus a sharp edge. Kind of these basic things that have very powerful impacts on a painting. And then once people were starting to understand, oh wow, this is how you create form, this is how you can create depth, then you drop them into that drawing from life, proportional drawing. And I remember when I was learning under you, I would do, I was working on a still life, and you'd come over and maybe I had messed up something, and so you would encourage me to approach it differently or start over even. And I was thinking, what? But like, I really like this one area, and I would have to take this away in order to do that. And you look at me like, you can do it again. You can match that color again. You can get this drawing back again. You did it once. You can do it again. And it was always kind of surprising because I didn't even think that I had, for one, I definitely didn't have the confidence, but I also didn't think that I had the skill, but you had already perceived that I had the skill. Really, I just didn't have the confidence.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. It's a big part
Yeah.
of it. That confidence is everything. If you believe you can do something, then you're not deterred jumping in and doing it. And so many people, and I know people in the Evolve program do it, but a lot of artists, when they're learning, they do this. If they're mixing colors, they'll write down the colors that they use to make these mixtures because they're afraid they can't do it again. But it's like if you did it once, just do the exact same process again, and you should get the same result, right? Because it was your skill and understanding that got you there. What people think is that they got lucky. And so you have to kind of tap that thinking down and say, no. I knew what I was doing because I didn't make 20 mixtures to get the one that I wanted. I mixed a little while and found my way to what I wanted. I knew the direction I wanted to go, and I was able to get the result. And in that means that it wasn't luck, it was skill and understanding. If you could do it once using skill and understanding, you can do it again. There's no need for formulas. It's just, you mix as you need. And that's with all of the skills. They're all like that. But you have to believe.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've said this before, but failure is a great teacher, but confidence is built by small successes. And those victories really start to snowball. And that's why, educators talk about having assignments that are both challenging but also accomplishable. When you're patient, when you take your time, you can get the result and look back and see that you actually did it. And then that confidence builds and carries itself over into the next piece that you do.
Yeah, one of the things I see with students, particularly in Evolve, because they're working in their own home, when they're doing their own proportional drawings, I always say a can, a ball, a cylinder, a cone, geometric shapes. Proportions are proportions. Doesn't matter what the objects are. And then people submit 10 figurines. And it's like, you don't need to go that far to develop this skill. Proportions are proportions. And so once you understand how proportions work, then you can commit extra time to doing something much more complex, but in the developing of the skill, it's not needed, right? So I always equate this to like swimming. You know, if you're gonna learn how to swim, you wanna do it in 4 feet of water in a heated swimming pool, right? That's optimum. You wanna be in a place where you can put your feet down and get your head out of the water, but deep enough that you can swim, you're not hitting the bottom with your hands. And a heated pool would be nice. It doesn't make sense to try to learn the skill out in the ocean during a storm, right? When you get these swells and there's like, it's like, why challenge yourself like that? The chance of you succeeding is diminished. And so if you do it in the swimming pool, you develop a great sense of accomplishment and confidence. And you go from there maybe into calm waters out in the ocean because it feels different. You get comfortable there. And then you move out into stormy waters, right? And that's like taking simple subjects and then making it a little bit more complex. Always something if you think about your abilities or your sphere of influence where you control the materials being a circle, you always want one foot squarely in that circle and the other one just outside of the circle. So you're working with a skill set and everything that you're comfortable with, but challenging yourself a little bit. The challenges are outside of the circle, so you only want to be a little bit outside with one foot. Some people, they feel like unless they're doing something where both feet are outside of the circle and they're in a place where they have no comfort, that they're not going to learn and they're not going to grow. And that's just not the case. Learning and growing, a lot of it is confidence, and you only develop confidence by having successes. The successes are small steps along the way, rarely big jumps. The big jumps actually very often turn into failures and chip away at your confidence. And so always baby steps along the way. As much as you can, anyway.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean not to challenge yourself, right? I mean, we want to be challenged. Challenging ourselves is important. But we can go too far and it's counterproductive.
Nicholas shared, my favorite thing about learning is thinking you know something, then finding out later it's not what you thought.
Yeah, well, when we're learning something, we don't know anything about it. We're learning it, so it's new. We have preconceived ideas, but we don't really know what we're doing.
Switching subjects here,
Yes.
I've got a question from Edward about painting on polished metal or any kind of metal really. He's seen artists doing it. It doesn't seem like there's any prep. It's just directly on the surface or they're not explaining the process. Is this advisable? Like what kind of...
That is something I know nothing about.
Okay.
I have absolutely nothing to offer on that front. I'm sorry I can't offer you thoughts on it. I've never done it, and I've actually never seen it done. I know people who do it, but I've never actually seen it done. I wouldn't be able to advise in any way. So sorry
Cool.
about that.
Yep, no worries.
Anyway, so you can see, I got this blocked in not too bad. How are we on time?
It is 9:15.
Okay, so a bit longer than I was thinking, but this is really where this is details. I've got details here, and then I've got some up in here. The leg, this whole section is going to go very fast, and this is not so bad. I've got lots of lights and shadows. This is all very subtle. Makes it it's a different kind of a challenge because of that. Trying to figure out where everything is when it's all hidden. So I'm just going to go around. I'm going to make sure all of my darks, because I feel like I've got gaps between things. So I want to make sure that I'm filling everything completely. That I've got no gaps. I don't want any of this blue from the background showing through. Everything to be seamless. I'm going to go over this and soften it with a brush, which will help to marry any paint where there might be gaps. It'll help to take those gaps out. And then I'll just jump in and I'll establish some cleaner edges, some sharper edges. And I've got to deal with I've got to deal with gradients. I haven't really dealt with the gradients. I was originally going to do that when I first started, and I got away from it. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. So I'll start down in here. And again, just subtly working this stuff. Doesn't have to be, again, this stuff is all, it's so dark, there's not a lot to be seen in here. I don't want to overly detail it. I want to allow the painting to feel like the photo. And so it would be very easy to overshoot and put in details that aren't there because I think I kind of maybe see them there. And so it's better to just try to follow the subject, the paint, the photograph, the reference material as close as you can, even when you're having to just hint at information. Again, rather than inventing it. Everything would become overly detailed. There's just not a lot going on in here. Again, you can see I'm not like slaving over this stuff. This is like really quick, just knocking the edges down. Again, it's not every edge. I'm just trying to figure out what is a gradient, what in here needs to be graded, and what is sharp. It's all very subtle, and so you just have to hint at the form. Coming together nicely as I'm doing this. All I'm doing is dropping my darker shade into my lighter one in the places where I feel the edges need to be knocked down, just on the edge. Just kind of tapping the edges down. That's pretty good. Just gonna grab a soft brush. Just make sure everything is smooth and even. Actually, before I do that, sure anything that shouldn't be too sharp isn't. I just got a few marks in here. That's everything. So just a very soft brush. It's a sable, and I'm just gonna kind of gently kind of dust over the painting and pull the paint left and right. So the sable brushes don't move a lot of paint, and so you can see like I just brushed it and there's nothing coming off, right? So all it's doing is very subtly moving just a little bit of paint around, helping to blend a little bit. And again, I'm not making gradients with this. The gradients I've already made. All I'm doing is kind of smoothing the paint out. And as I do that, it's going to help to soften the edges just a little bit. Take just a little bit of the edge off of the sharp edges. Just kind of bring it in line here, and then I'll be able to go back in later on and make them sharp. Just a little bit. And again, I'm trying to keep it even, trying to give a feel of what's in here. I'll bring up the lights. The lights are what are going to make the sharp edges. And then later on, if I need, in a subsequent pass, I will then go in and drop in darker shades if I find that I need them to pull out details. I don't imagine that I will. This armor just doesn't have that much in the way of what you would think of as details. So I use that brush, and you can see I kind of clean the brush, but there's nothing here. There's nothing coming off, right? And that gives you an idea of just how little, I'm barely touching the painting, just how little it's moving anything around that's there. I'm just gonna grab a big fan brush and just pull everything in one direction, make sure it's smooth before I go in and start putting in my lighter shades, right? And I just wanna make sure it's flat. And again, even the fan brush actually picked up quite a bit more paint than the other brush.
Hey, Kevin?
Yeah.
How long does it typically take you to do an illustration like this?
I haven't done an illustration a very, very long time. I actually couldn't answer that question. What I can say is that even though it's been taking longer than I expected, this painting is flying. We are only, what week is this? 7?
Yep.
We're at the end of today, we will only be 21 hours into this painting. This painting will be done within 30 hours. If you were doing this professionally, that would be a pain. You wouldn't even be working a full 40-hour work week to knock this out. Typically, illustrations, they take 2 weeks to get done. You do 24 in a year. Every 2 weeks, you deliver one. So this is moving along at a very, very good pace. This could easily, I think, for a typical artist, 60 hours. So this technique is really quick. This approach, we're moving at a nice pace. The 3-hour increments make it hard because I'm kind of rushing to get things done. But I could sit down in a single day, work an 8-hour day, and probably knock out the figure. Now I'm doing it probably less than 8 hours because you're going to get faster as you go. Like I stopped, and now I'm having to refigure out what I did, and I'll get momentum as I go. But this is actually moving at a very good pace from the standpoint of making a painting. It's a very, very good pace that we've got going here. You know, the constraints of the 3-hour window to do the work is really the only thing that's an issue. If I could just paint until I was done, this painting wouldn't take much to. Like I said, I mean, easily I could probably, if it was an illustration, I probably would have painted the whole figure in one day, heads, hands, and everything else. Probably make it like a 10 or 12-hour day. But that would be it, and it would be done. I'm actually looking at this, and I'm feeling like there's too much going on in here, and so I want to break this up. I want to get a little bit less information in here. Feeling like these shapes are just too obvious, and in here, they're not. They're really obscured. It's bothering me. And again, as I'm working, I'm just looking at it, and I just don't like the way it looks. I stop, I fix it. I don't move on until it's the way I want it to be. If I see something, it's again, and this is with, anytime you're painting anything, like, don't leave things behind that don't look right. When you find something, like, do something about it. So now I'm just going to start pulling out some of these edges. Like you see up above. Again, I'm picking and choosing where these marks go. It's not everything. Again, we'll be building these lights up a little bit more once it's dry. Easier to do it when it's dry rather than when it's wet. Be able to just kind of scribble the stuff in right on top. Make some really crisp marks. There won't be big value jumps, but the marks will be relatively crisp. And so they'll stay. So basically be the same, but the marks will go down really fine. This clip is important. It's the one thing, it's like the one metal thing here. So I want to make sure that it feels mechanical. Again, I'll be able to clean it up a little bit more later, but I don't want to be sloppy with it. I don't want to think like, hey, I'll deal with it later on. I want to kind of handle it here and make sure that it feels mechanical. That way I'm just kind of adding a few accents in the last pass, not having to actually address it and render it at that time. Blend in with everything else that's going on in here. I want it to stand out. And I'll be able to ramp that up a bit later on. Again, like these are the details. All they are simple strokes. Because all of the underpinnings they're holding the place. All I have to do is drop a few little highlights on here, and these feel like details. I mean, they're barely more than single lines in a lot of cases. And when I go back in later on after it dries, I'll be able to use the shade again and kind of amp them up even further. The shade right now is sinking in to the paint that's already down, that's wet, because I'm painting on top of stuff. So after this dries, right, this is going to blend nicely, and then when it dries, I'll be able to paint with this paint right on top and render in details. And they'll be very, very close in value. They'll be very close in color and value because it's the same shade. The difference is that when I put it down on top of this when it's dry, it won't blend, it won't mix with the wet paint that's down because the wet paint will no longer be wet. So it'll sit on the surface, it'll stay a little bit brighter. And so it'll be really close. It won't look like over the top. It'll blend in nicely. It'll feel like part of this. Again, I'm being very particular about where these marks go down. Overdo it. I can allow most of this to sit very quietly. Doesn't need to be brought up and strengthened. Again, some of this stuff I'm not even really sure what I'm looking at. I'm trying to figure out what the form of these things are as I'm going, so I know that I'm making something look three-dimensional. Trying to make sense of it in that way. But a lot of these things, I don't even know what they really are. I know I can see the form, but I don't know what the pieces are describing. Like, there's a whole bunch of little straps and buckles and things like that. Not familiar with this stuff. Right? It's just a costume for a painting. I'm not really familiar with what these things are. Just about coming to the end of this part, and then I'll be able to move down the leg. I think I'm gonna get this done first, that armor. Now there are some stronger lights in here that need to be brought up, but I'm not gonna put those in now. I'll wait till this dries. That's because we have this bright light on this side, and so some of that's hitting in here. I'm not gonna worry about it now. I don't wanna start getting into these big value jumps. I wanna keep the value jumps relatively small, and I'll deal with those value jumps later on. I'm just trying to establish the form. Very little more. Be particular about the shapes as I'm putting them down. I need to be able to make sense of them later on. It's looking pretty good to me. And again, wet paint into wet paint, you're not going to be able to get really pristine edges. And so if you fight for them, you're just going to wind up making these thick, clumsy marks. So a little bit of restraint. You know that you're going to be able to come back around later on and do it, so accept the limitations of the tool for now. Okay to put stuff off for later on if the material is going to fight you. I think that's good. Again, I'm going to just grab that fan brush again, make sure it's clean. I'm just going to knock everything down. just a little bit. I just want to make sure I'm not leaving any paint texture behind. You see, I clean the brush as I go. Very gentle. Okay. Very gentle, so that's good. Let's get this leg going. In all of this, trying to simplify all of this. Paint every little detail. Enough of these things, they're so dark, I can bury them all in one shade. And so that's what I'm doing.
It is 9:40.
Okay. Starting to pick up some speed here. The disconnect, like taking the break and coming back a week later, even though I knew what I wanted to do, still have to settle into it. You know, and it's like, you know, you build momentum as you paint. And so I had to break inertia. This took a little bit longer than I wanted, but it's actually, our pace is good. This arm, I don't think we're going to get done, but this should fly. It all depends on how quickly this piece gets done, whether or not we finish her today. But that's the goal. The goal is still to get her done. It's like the fact that it's going to be that we're short on time here, that it's taking a while. I'm going to work a little faster, but I'm not going to put the painting at risk. Yes, I'm now finding another piece of information that I left out in my transfer. It's a substantial thing to have left out. Again, I just draw it in. That I left it out, I figure out where it goes relative to everything else that's here, and I just place it. Worst that'll happen is that I'll be wrong in the placement of something. Deal with that later on.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah.
Did you mix the linseed oil into the paint that you're using right now?
There is nothing in the paint that I'm using. Absolutely nothing. It's just paint.
So it's just stayed dry because you've kept it all together and then taken small amounts?
Right, it hasn't dried. It hasn't dried because it's been covered and it's in these big puddles. Once it skins over, air can't get to it. So it stays fine. And it's still, like, it's stiffened up a little bit. Like, I can feel it. Not bad. I mean, it's workable. This is actually starting to really fly. All of its complexity, it's not going to take very long. Again, still have to be careful. It's easy to get overly confident, and that's got its own problems attached to it. Very careful to put paint only where it goes. I'm trying to speed up a little bit, but again, not to the point where I'm putting the painting at risk. I'm very careful not to do that.
Question for you.
Yes.
Are you going to be able to replicate that texture on the whiter parts of the outer thighs, the part that looks like fishnets pointing downwards and arrows?
No, I'm not going to put in. I could put the texture in, but I'm not going to. It's not necessary. If I paint it and I decide that that the painting needs it, then yeah, I'll put it in. But I don't perceive that to be the case. And so at the moment I'm not thinking in terms of putting it in. I could change my mind. That is possible. But I don't see that it contributes in a positive way to the painting. Having it in or not having it in doesn't make a difference in the grand scheme of the painting. And so that being the case, why do the unnecessary work that just gives me a lateral change in the painting, doesn't move the painting forward, right? It doesn't make the painting better, it just makes the painting different. There's no reason to do that. No reason to put myself through the extra labor, which could be substantial, for something that doesn't make a better painting, but merely makes a different painting, right? And that's a very important thing, like when you're working. Never squander your time. Your time, don't get into doing things that don't make the painting better, right? The whole idea of painting, when you make a painting, is you want to make it the best it can be. That doesn't mean you do more work. It just means that you do the things that make the painting best. And sometimes it's eliminating things rather than putting things in. They say a good artist knows what to paint. A great artist knows what to leave out, right? And that's very, very true. Understanding what not to put into the work, what is superfluous. You don't waste your time on things that don't matter. You could spend hours and hours and hours putting a texture into something, and it doesn't make the painting a better painting. So what was the point of it, right? If it's just an exercise to see if you can do it, well, that's fine. But from the standpoint, like again, if you're looking at this from a professional standpoint, you just diminish the hourly wage that you were making by adding unnecessary hours onto your work, right? And you're not being paid by the hour, you're being paid for the delivered final product. And so if the final product takes you 10 hours or 20, 10 hours you get paid a certain amount, 20 hours you get half of that per hour. Right? You make the same amount of money, but from an hourly wage standpoint, you make half. And so if you do something that adds 10 hours to a 10-hour painting, but it doesn't make the painting better, well, that's really wasteful of your time. And again, it's okay to do it if it's something you're just like, oh, I just want to do this. I like the challenge, and so I want to do it. It doesn't move the painting forward and make it a better painting, but I'm curious about how to approach it, and so I'm going to dedicate the time and energy, right? And that's different, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you should pick and choose those battles. Like always pick and choose those battles. Be thoughtful about them. making sure that everything is filled completely. Hopefully I don't have to come back and touch anything up with this darker shade like it did up in here. Both my darker shades are in. I'm now going to jump to my lighter shade. Everything that's not filled is going to get this. I'm not going to worry about the edges. I decided that it's easier, rather than going back and forth to the photo, I'm simply going to fill everything. Everything will have a sharp edge, and then I'll use the photograph to figure out which edges should be graded. I think that's going to go faster. Allow me to commit time to just making sure all these areas are filled well. Again, like these are what you would think of as details, but I'm using a number 6 brush. I haven't gone down to a tiny little brush. There'll be time for that later on when I put in the next shade one step lighter. So putting in those, like the lines like I did up here. But for now, this brush is small enough to do the job, and it's going to help me move a little bit quicker. I have to have control over it. There are places where I'm going to have to move a little slower because it is a little bit clumsier at its size, but it's going to allow me in these bigger areas to work very quickly and fill, where a smaller brush could take 2 or 3 times the amount of time to fill. The bigger brush is going to cover that ground without any issue. It's going to do it nice and quick for me. I said I'll probably move up into an even larger brush when I do the leg, because there's almost nothing there. It's just a big cylinder with a gradient. Should move out very quickly. Starts out and I'm like, so I'm gonna paint the figure and then the background, I'm gonna do this thing and that thing. And now it's like, okay, scramble, scramble, scramble. Yeah, and again, you know, like, even though I wanna get certain things done, the painting's only gonna let me get done properly what can be done in the time. And it's like, even though I'd like to get more done, I accept the fact that I'm only gonna get done what I can. I'm not gonna sacrifice quality. There are things I can do to move a little faster, but there are limits to that as well. Can only go so fast before I start sacrificing the quality of the finished painting. And so, to accept that there's a limit within the window of time that I'm working today. I don't want to accept that. I want to be able to get this thing knocked out, but that's the reality. And if I accept it, it makes it easier for me to just stay in the moments while I'm working and not start doing dumb things to the painting and putting it at risk, getting frustrated or aggravated or impatient. Again, I'm able to do some things to speed up the process, but there is a limit. And I'm only able to do it because I have a lot of experience. I know what to do, I know where my limits are, and I know where I will start sacrificing quality for speed. And I won't go there. Like, I'll recognize it when I start doing it. And so I'll pull back from it the moment it starts. Yeah, I'm not accustomed to these small paintings. Like, it's tough on the shoulders, sitting here working like this. Also, keeping distance between me and the painting is a bit of a challenge. Like, I'd normally sit this in my lap and just work like that, so I could rest my hand on the painting, like really rest it. As I'm doing it this way, I have to hold my arm up. Some relief by resting, but not a lot. It's good to pay attention to where you're grabbing paint from. Questions as I'm going here.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, Kevin's getting into the zone of his painting, so now would be a great time to ask him some questions. Linda said, I'm impressed that Kevin doesn't even flinch when the weights are dropped from the floor above.
Yeah.
We've had a couple loud ones tonight.
Yeah. I'm a gym rat, so that noise it's like home.
Does make me wonder what kind of workout they're doing, though.
They're doing power cleans. They're taking the weight off the ground up to here over their head. Those big drops are from overhead. They're just letting them go. So I've got it all filled now. I'm now going to start. Getting some of these gradients in. I'm going to start with the obvious areas first. Most of the drops aren't so bad, but yeah, every once in a while, it's somebody up there that's moving real weight, and they get loud. They drop. It's a big lift.
Here's a question for you.
Yes.
When painting see-through clothing or light fabric, do you paint the body part separately, or do you paint it as if it's one whole thing to make it look transparent?
Yeah, so actually, we actually answered this question a few weeks back. But so basically what you do is you wouldn't paint the skin and then the lace on top of it or something like that. Because like if you have a person with lace, you don't know what the skin looks like. You're seeing it through the lace. So you paint it as one thing. Whatever the color value of the skin showing through the lace is, that's the color value you would pick. The amount of contrast, the quality of edge, all of that, you're going to paint it the way you see it. You're not going to guess what the skin looks like without the lace and then try to put the lace in on top. That's not going to work. So yeah, it's painted as one thing. Yeah, and actually, when we talked about it, I said that I would do a demo for it at some point on one of these live streams. I'll actually paint it so that you can see how that works. It's a fun exercise. It's a fun exercise because your brain tells you like what the skin is, and it tells you what the lace is, and you have to be able to see them and ignore what your brain is telling you about them. Be able to see it as one thing rather than one thing on top of another. It's a challenge. You know, your brain, you know what you're looking at. You have to tell your brain to view it in a different way. Just want to make sure I'm getting all of these gradients in place.
Question from Becky.
Yes.
I notice a lot of people put the main figures in last. Why is that?
Well, I mean, you don't have to, but it makes sense to do it. And the reason is that the figure, which is going to be the primary focus of the painting, is colored by the environment. So if you get the environment in first, it helps to tell you what to do with the figure. And that's not really the case here because I've intentionally split the background and the foreground into two very different color schemes. But normally, a figure would be in an environment, and so you have to make the figure fit in the space visually, right? So if you put somebody in a scene that's very red, standing near the opening of a volcano, you can't take a regular photograph from a studio, which is normal white light, and hope that the person will look reasonable there. You're going to have to make the figure red, relatively speaking. You're going to have to make the figure more red to fit the environment. But if you put the figure in first and you made it more red, it would look ridiculous on a blank canvas. So the environment, which is easier to manage, goes in first, and then you adjust the figures for the environment. You adjust the subject matter that's up front for the environment. But that's actually why it's done. And again, it doesn't have to be. If you have control over the materials, you understand how everything works, that's a choice. If you don't know how everything works, then it really becomes necessary to guide you because it'll function as a guide. You'll know when you start putting in your green figure or your greenish figure into your red background, it's not going to look right. You'll know immediately as you start working, and so It'll clue you in to make a change.
We got another question from Sandra.
Yes.
When painting grapes, what is the trick to making the highlight believable?
It's always the same. Like you don't paint grapes. This is always the answer. You don't paint grapes. You don't paint portraits or eyes or fur. You paint values, colors, and edges. And that highlight is a value color decision, meaning a color of a certain value, light or dark, and it has a particular edge to it, right? And it might be 3 values, one not as bright, one a little bit brighter, one a little bit brighter, and each one of them has a graded edge, so it looks like a fade, right? Or maybe the brightest one is hard-edged and the other 2 are faded, but you have to look at it and figure out what color value you're dealing with, and then what the edges are that connect it to the color value next to it. And that's all it is. And if you don't think that way, everything you tackle requires, like, I have to understand grapes, I have to understand hair, I have to understand zippers, I have to understand wood. You have to learn every single material in the world. But if you understand that you're only managing values, colors, and edges, everything falls under that umbrella. Master those 3 things, and it doesn't matter what it is, you will always have the answer to the question of how do I paint this? Because it's always color, value, edge decisions against the color and value edge next to it, and so on and so on. But that really is, I know that's not the kind of answer you want, but that is actually the answer. The answer is that it's not a highlight on a grape, it's a value, color decision, and it's an edge decision. And when you start seeing it that way, you will be empowered. It takes time and working on this stuff with that thinking in mind in order to develop the ability to see everything that way. Sorry to disappoint.
But it is so true.
That is the answer. And that's the only answer.
Yeah. Yep, it is incredibly empowering because it does not matter what the subject is. If it's the light, the values, it applies to literally everything. And it would take you a lifetime, not even, more than a lifetime, to just to learn like all of those things. But if you only have 3 things to get a sense of values, edges, color, that's it. Suddenly you can paint everything. Yeah. It's so simple.
Yeah, and that's the idea. If you have value, color, and edge at your command, you can literally paint everything and anything, because everything and anything is made up of those parts. If you're trying to learn how to paint a particular thing, you have to learn all of the nuance of it. So let's say you want to paint a scene with trees and grass and dirt and rocks and water. You have to figure out how to paint rocks, and you have to figure out how to paint dirt, and figure out how to paint grass, and figure out how to paint leaves and bark on trees and water. Each individual thing is a lifetime of learning. But if you can see all of those things through the filter or the lens of value, color, edge, they're all painted the same way, pretty much. So you might move the brush around a little bit or use a different brush for one thing or another based on texture. But the idea, the answers to those kinds of questions are all there in those 3 things: value, color, edge.
That's actually one of the underlying themes of these live streams that we're doing, right, Kevin? Is like Kevin is tackling a sci-fi oil painting illustration, and then another time he's doing a portrait, but ultimately it's all the same thing. And the answers are always the same, which again is just very empowering. It's nice to be able to see the different subject matters, and it really just simply reinforces that it is the same things over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing I can't paint. Anything you put in front of me, I can paint. And all it is that I'm filtering it through those 3 things and making sense of it. And once I've made sense of it through those three filters, I'm using a skill set that I've got a really solid command of. So I'm not having to invent anything along the way. Once I break whatever the subject is down into those components, it becomes manageable because I'm now in familiar territory. You know, I don't paint trees, but I can. I don't paint a lot of things, but I can because I understand what they're made up of, what would go on the end of a brush to make them, what to bring them to life. Right? So again, like it's an empowering thing to know that if you grab 3 pieces of information and you got control over them, everything you want to paint, you can paint. And so I'm just knocking this down again, just like I did up in here, softening it, making sure everything is even. All of my gradients I built out when I applied paint. And now I'm just going to go up 1 value and render in some sharper edges. Again, I'm going to have to come back to this, like all of this, I'm going to have to come back and clean these things up a little bit more in a subsequent pass. Bring up stronger highlights, maybe push back darker values, things that recess a little bit more. But for the most part, I'm getting everything in place here. Like I've got highlights on here I'm not going to handle today. But I'm going to be able to move this way down the road. So this is actually going to be lighter. I'm going to start by putting this in. Are we on time?
It is 10:10.
Okay. So feeling we're going to get the legs done and we'll maybe stop there. I don't think I'm going to get the arm done. I might be able to get the legs and the mountains. This arm, I don't think, without rushing, I don't think it's going to happen. I'd rather not rush. I'd rather just add another day to the process. We'll be able to then take our time with the rocks. And so next week what we'll probably do is knock out the arm and the rocks, assuming that I can get to the mountains today. The mountains are the same color values that I'm using here, so it shouldn't be that big a deal, assuming that I have enough time. Again, these things, they take what they take. Not a big deal. One more 3-hour session on the other side of this. Again, easy enough. Normally, my photo reference would be exactly the same size as my painting. So I'm doing a 1-to-1. This is a bit small, it's quite a bit smaller. And so I'm looking at the scale of something here, moving it over here. Sometimes the marks, something's like a centimeter here and it needs to be 2 centimeters here or 1.5. And so I'm kind of having to make the translation as I'm going. And it can be a little confusing sometimes. Again, like I'm engaged, I'm not thinking like that. I'm trying to grab visual information and make sense of it and move it, but I'm having to calculate the scale of everything as I'm going. And so that creates its own challenge. There is something to be said for having reference material that is the same size as the thing you're painting. It certainly makes it easier. A 1-to-1 relationship makes life a lot easier. And I know I've got to drop much brighter highlights out here. I'm not going to worry about them for now. I'll deal with them when I come back in and clean all this stuff up after it's dry.
Got a question from TY.
Yes.
I saw a pro artist breathe a sigh of relief after he was done drawing from life. I had no idea someone so great could be nervous. Do you ever worry about messing up on camera?
You've not been watching, have you? I mess up all the time. I mean that's just part of it. You play around like I'm just painting. Like I'm not infallible. I'm solving the same problems here that any amateur or any other professional is solving. I have more experience, but that guarantees nothing. Guarantees nothing. I've got to get in here and roll up my sleeves and clear my mind and do my work. So yeah, I mean, I make mistakes all the time. I think I literally, every single one of the live streams we've done, I've tanked the first day. I think. I feel like that's been the thing. I make a mess the first day and then I spend the rest of the time kind of fixing it. So, and that's fine. And like you see, if you watch them, you'll see, I mean, I talk about it because I think it's important to share that. I think it's very important that people who are learning see that just because someone knows what they're doing, they've been doing it for a long time, doesn't mean that they're infallible. We fight the same fights. Every artist, every painter, when you sit in front of an easel, has to fight the same fights. You have to solve the same problems. And so there's no guarantee of anything. Come in and you work. And obviously experience plays into it. Experience certainly helps. There's no guarantees. I did a painting years ago. It was a portrait of a gentleman. And I tanked the painting. This is a commissioned piece. I tanked the painting twice. I had to repaint it. I painted it 3 times. I couldn't get it right. And I mean, it was because I wasn't treating the piece with the respect that it needed or that it demanded. I saw it as a quick, easy painting to do. And so I treated it that way. And so I wasn't focused when I was working. And so I paid for that. I paid for that. I think, most artists you'll find are quite humble about what they do. And the reason is that we know that it takes nothing to fall on your face. And especially when you do this stuff publicly like this is just me waiting to humiliate myself, to give people the impression I have no idea what I'm doing. And if, like, when I start these, I always feel like that. Like, I'm going to walk in and this is the day that everyone's going to realize I'm a fraud. Even for me, I'm going to realize, oh, yeah, I've delivered 700 paintings in my career, but I got lucky all those times, and now I'm going to show the world I have no idea what I'm doing, and it's been luck the whole time.
And it only gets worse the better you get.
Yeah, the more you do it, the better you get, the worse that feeling gets. Because the height to fall from becomes greater and greater. This expectation of you being able to just do it. And it's just not the reality. But the thing is, the way you get around it is you don't put pressure on yourself. You're like, well, I'm going to paint, and we'll see how it goes. I know that if I commit enough time and energy, the painting will come together in time. So it doesn't matter if I struggle, if it runs an extra week. None of that matters. What matters is that I'm sitting here and I'm doing something that I love, and I'm sharing it with people, and it'll go the way it goes, and that's it. But yeah, every artist, again, the better the artist, the harder this is, because the height to fall from, it just gets greater and greater. People's expectations are that you shouldn't fail. And then if you do, they want to know why, like what happened? And the bottom line is that it's like, well, this painting got me, It happens. And I wasn't in the right mindset. I didn't do what I needed to do. I didn't bring my A game. There are a million reasons why a painting can fail. And it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it, you're susceptible to all of those potentials, just like anyone else. And it never ends. You never get to the point You never get to the point where that's not the case. It's always the case forever. And it's why you find that most real painters, most real artists are very humble about what they do, because they realize, like, they have to do it every day, right? They have to bring their A game every day to be successful, to maintain, you know, their work. Every day has to be the best day of their life, sitting in front of that easel. And that is not easy to do. You know, you're not feeling well today. Tough luck, you've got work to do. Right? I could come in here and I could be sick. I'm scheduled to be painting, I come in and I do it. There have been a couple of days when we've done this where I've been a little under the weather, and I come in and I work anyway. And it's like, yeah, I drag a little bit, but I've got to work. If you're a pro, being sick, you sit in your studio and you work anyway. Unless you can't get out of bed, you work. You have to deliver on those days the same qualities you do on the days that you're feeling great, right? Because you have a job and you have a deadline, you have to deliver. And your work can't fluctuate in quality. It's got to be the same all the time. That's what people are buying. They're buying a set quality. They know what they expect from you because they've seen your work and that's why they hired you. And so they expect exactly what they hired you for to show up when you deliver a painting to them.
The nameless subscriber said, I've heard that it's not about avoiding the mistake, it's how you deal with them that your experience comes into play.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's you know, if you're crushed by something not working the way you want it to, the way you expect it to, because, you know, I've been doing this for a long time, so it should just happen. You know, if that crushes you, you're going to be in trouble. You know, it's like, you know, we talk about this. I talk about this to students all the time. Like, people say, like, I should be able to get this done. Well, why? Why do you think you should be able to? I mean, I've had students who have been with me, they'll be studying with me for 3 months, 4 months, and they're like, they get frustrated with what they're doing. They're like, I should be better than this. And I was like, well, that's arrogant. Why should you be better than this? Right? Because you've been at it 3 months? I've been at it 30 years. I'm not better than this. I struggle just like you do. Maybe not on the exercise you're doing, but something further down the road. Yeah, even a simple portrait. This armor is relatively simple. But it doesn't mean that I can just pay no attention to it. I've got to be very careful in what I'm doing if I want it to work in the end, right? And it's exactly the same attention, and it's the same tools, values, colors, and edges that I'm using here that somebody who's been with me for 3 months is using in a painting. And so it's the same exact thing. And you can't get to a point where you expect you should just be able to have what you want. This is a never-ending challenge. And one of the nice things about this is that it is a never-ending challenge. You will never get bored doing this. You paint for your entire life. You paint 60, 70 years. You will always be challenged by it. Always. Because again, the moment that you stop focusing, your work will fall apart. So there's something really nice about that. Like, you know, man, you're an accountant. It's the same thing over and over and over. I mean, boring. I mean, just like almost every job. This thing, there's so much room to grow, but even if you stop growing, you're just painting. The challenges that are posed to you with every painting, they keep it interesting. Just part of the fun.
What do you think about this statement, Kevin? I think everything in life is a mental game first and skill next.
They kind of play side by side. I think like the mental game never goes away, right? I mean, because we're always in our own heads. It's telling us what we can and can't do, how good we are, you know? So the mental game is always present. And then your skills, again, like, you develop your skills. You continue to develop them your whole life if you're smart. You get better and better at things. But again, the challenges don't go away. Getting better at something just means you to go, like, if you're an amateur boxer, you're not fighting world champions. But as you get better, the fighters you fight get better, and you get better. Furthermore, you keep going until you're standing in a ring with a Mike Tyson or a guy, a Tyson Fury, and it's like the challenges get bigger and bigger and more daunting as you get better at this stuff. But again, I think this stuff all kind of goes together. Like, you'll be in your own head no matter where you are on the path. You're always in your own head. It's the most powerful voice in your life, right? Because it's always there. You can be influenced by external forces, but eventually you're in a quiet space and it's just you. And then it's like, well, have you cultivated a mindset that what you're telling yourself is positive or negative? Does it chip away at you and tell you can't do these things, or does it tell you you can do them? You just have to be committed. You have to is it a positive voice that you've got cultivated, or is it a negative one? A lot of people cultivate negative voices in their head, and you see it when you talk to them. I can't do this, and it's like, well, why can't you do it? And it's like, because they believe that unless they can do it the first time when they try, it's outside of their range. They can't grow into it. They're not gifted. Whatever it is, and it's like, so. Again, I think I don't know. Again, I think it all kind of goes together and it stays together as you grow. You don't have one and then the other.
It is 10:25.
Okay. Yeah. So, I might not even get to the mountains tonight. A little disappointing.
At this point, Kevin, how many sessions would you guess that we have?
Well, I should be able to get this arm and then the shadows and the mountains done next week. That should actually be a pretty easy day. I'm going to finish this tonight. So next week it'll be this arm. I'll get in all the shadows on the rocks, and I'll be able to do a little bit more with them because I'm not going to be rushed. And then the mountain range. And then following week, I'll probably knock out the rocks, clean up this, leaving nothing but the head and hands. And then the following week, I'll knock out the head and hands. That'll be the last day. So we'd say 3 more sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll be at about 30 hours, right? About 30. Yeah, we'll be at 30 hours at that point, which again, to produce an illustration like this, is really good. That is a really nice amount of time. This is not an overly complex piece, but it's got enough going on in it to eat up the clock. And so, again, as a book cover, this works beautifully. It doesn't have to be overly complex. Again, a book cover would be reduced down to something this big. So if you put too much into it, you can't read it. So we need more kind of bolder, grander statements about what's going on rather than the tiny little ins and outs. Too much detail, it doesn't reduce well. You lose the beauty of your image.
So which session would you be adding these highlights and brighter things?
Not the next one, but the one after. So I'll do this arm, the rocks and the mountains next week.
Uh-huh.
A week after, I would then clean everything up. I would finish the rocks, the lights, because I'm going to do the shadows in the rocks, not the lights. So then I would spend next week, or that following week, finishing the rocks and the light, making sure the mountains are pretty, pulling up all of the things that are not where I want them to be yet in this, bringing up all those highlights, leaving nothing but the face and the hands to complete the painting.
Okay, gotcha. So you won't be glazing in afterwards?
I don't see it being necessary.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I thought maybe, but I don't see it being necessary. It's actually coming together really nicely. The colors and the values are working beautifully together. It's for as subtle as it is, it's very rich. It has a really nice feel to it. And when I drop in those extra contrasts, it's just going to sing. Such high hopes for today. You can see, like, when I first started today, I was like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. Well, it didn't work out. Going back to the question of, when things going to plan, doesn't always go to plan. Today certainly didn't. I got a decent amount done, but not as much as I thought I was going to. I thought for sure I'd be able to get, at the very least, that arm, even if I didn't get the rocks done. Pretty sure that I'd be able to. So, again, I haven't done one of these. I haven't done something like this kind of detail at this scale. Wow, it's been 20 years. It's been 20 years since I did a book cover. 22 years, actually, I think. This, like, working on this is a bit of a risky proposition for me. I like to do it publicly because I'm terribly out of practice. I'm having to remember how I did this. And again, I know how it all works, so it's not like I'm inventing it from scratch. I know how it works. And I'm a much more knowledgeable painter now than I was when I did illustration. But I don't work like this. I don't work on these little paintings with these little brushes. Most of what I do is big brushes and, even something that's a detail. A detail is, this big in a painting that I do, not this big. And so it's not that this one is harder and one is easier, but they're different. You have to be able to change gears between them. Again, like, you know, this legs, there's not a lot going on here. It's just a gradient. Should go down pretty quickly.
It is 10:30.
Okay. Oh, I'm not getting this done. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions. Here's a question. When people start to practice regularly, how long does it take to become a habit?
Yeah, everyone is different, but depending on what the thing is, simple things, a few weeks. It's not, it doesn't take that long. Again, I mean, it's the more you do it, the faster the habit develops, right? Because, you know, if you keep breaking from the thing and you come back, you have to remind yourself of what it was you were doing, what you were thinking, why things are the way they are. But if you're consistently working, and again, that's like, let's say you do 1 hour a day. Better to do that than 7 hours in one day and then take a week off, right? A 1 hour a day or a half hour a day to reinforce the thinking, right? Because this is all knowledge. You're applying it, but you have to have the knowledge first, right? You have to get the knowledge in your head and make sense of it. You can't do anything until you have a solid grasp of the knowledge, right? And so the way we do that is we immerse ourselves in it. And so that's the starting point. Again, better to do a half hour a day every day for a week rather than 3.5 hours, or an hour every day for a week rather than 7 hours in one day and then take the rest of the week off. Like, you think about it, if you want to learn a foreign language, right? If you work, let's say you spend an entire day immersed in it, but then don't come back to it for a week, the likelihood of you retaining any of it a week later is very small. But if you do it every day, even if it's just a little bit, there's a good chance you're going to retain stuff. You're not going to, it's not the same level of immersion, but you're going to retain things because it's every single day you're getting a taste of it. So, when you're learning to do this stuff, obviously the more time you can commit, the better, but better to do it a little bit every day because it keeps it fresh in your mind.
And Becky is wondering if you think that us beginners should sell paintings without the frames.
you can, you know, doesn't really matter. If people are buying paintings from you and you don't have them framed and they're okay with that, then that's fine. Frames make the paintings look nicer, right? And so like for me, if I had the choice to frame something or to not frame it, I would frame it. It just makes sense because it's a nicer way of presenting it. It protects the painting. You know, if you drop it, it protects the corners, right? So a frame is a nice thing if you can put it on. And you can get inexpensive frames if you're working in standard sizes. Right? I recommend, like, if you're going to be, if you're just starting out and you want to start making sales, work in standard sizes because you can buy frames for almost nothing. 8 by 10, 9 by 12, 11 by 14. Don't go to odd sizes because the frames start to become prohibitively expensive. You have to have them custom made. And so you want to stay away from that. Stay with standard sizes. Keep those costs low, and you pass the cost along with your art. Look, you know, if a frame costs you $20 and that $20 makes it so that somebody doesn't want to buy your painting, they probably weren't buying your painting anyway. I mean, realistically. Unless you're selling your paintings for $20, which, you know, I mean, if you're part of our program, you know how to price your work. That's probably not an appropriate number, right? You know, if you're putting in, let's say, 20 hours on a painting, you have to know what your hourly wage is going in, what your time is worth, right? So, again, a $20 or a $30 frame on top of a $250 painting, right? If you say you're charging minimum wage, I don't even know what minimum wage is. Was it like $13 or something like that?
I'm not sure.
Here, I think it's like $13. Let's say it's $15, right? Let's say you wouldn't work for less than minimum wage because that's minimum wage. Any job you have or you get, you would get paid that. So let's say you start there. It takes you 10 hours to, or say 20 hours to make a painting. It's a $300 painting. You put a $25 or $30 frame on it. If that $25 or $30 ruins the sale, it's unlikely you were making the sale. And so I would frame the work. Just don't go crazy with the costs. Work with standard size canvases so that the frames are cheap. It's a nicer presentation when you deliver, makes the painting look nicer. The person who gets your painting can literally hang it the moment they get home, where if it's not in a frame, now what do? They kind of lean it against, they put it on a table and lean it against something. Does the painting ever get framed? Does it ever go up on the wall? I mean, now you're giving them a job to go and frame the piece. Now, when you're talking about big, extravagant paintings, that's different. But for something small, the last thing they need is a job handed to them after they buy the painting from you. Better for them to get the painting ready to hang. Also, if you're doing that, you're the one picking a frame based on what looks nicest on the painting. If you leave the person buying the painting to get a frame, they'll buy a frame based on what looks good against their couch. You know, what matches the motif in their home. And that's not a way to buy frames. But again, people who don't do this stuff don't know. If you have a bit of sense about it, you do it. You do it for them.
Celtic peasant said, or if you give a painting without frames, then you have given that person a job, not a gift.
Yeah, to a degree, if it's a gift. But again, when I buy something from a place, I don't want a job added on top of it, right? If I get something, I want to be able to use it, when I get it. Again, a painting, I don't know any, some layperson, they don't know what to do with it. They don't know what a good frame is, right? Most people, they'll depend on the artist to tell them what to do with it. So for that, you may as well just do it for them so that they get it they get it, it's already done. They don't even have to think about it, right? And it's just, and again, it makes it easier. There's a wire on the back. All they have to do is put a nail in the wall and they can hang your painting. Last thing you want to do is make it tough for them to put your work up, right? If somebody hangs your work, it potentially generates interest, right? If you're making good paintings and somebody hangs your work, that now becomes your calling card in their home. Anyone who sees it, wow, that's a really nice painting. Where'd you get it, right? So you want it up on their wall. You don't want to just like hand it off and be like, well, I got my money, I'm good. You want to make sure that it goes up on the wall where people are going to see it, because it potentially generates more interest in your work, right? You have a vested interest in getting it up on their wall, not just as a sale, but because it generates potential buzz about what you do. Again, if you're doing good work, every painting you do potentially generates more customers. And so you want to think of it that way. So you want to make an effort to ensure that that painting is going to be seen, that it's going to be seen in its best light, which means that it's properly framed to the degree that you can influence it, and that it gets hung immediately when it gets to where it's going, right? I mean, that just, to me, that makes sense. Again, I'm just thinking big gradient. I staggered the values. I put the black here, and then the red, the darkest brown here. I took that darkest brown and put it here, and then I'm gonna put the lighter brown up here. And that should give me the impression that this part of the black uniform and this part of the band are both in shadow, and then this up here will both be in light. Again, I'm just repurposing the same values, the same colors over and over again. Not creating anything new. Just using the same stuff over and over. I'm not even thinking color, I'm just thinking how dark or light these things are and working with that.
Got another question for you.
Yes.
About frames, have you made your own before?
Yes, but very badly. Very badly. I don't do that kind of work. Before I got into art, I did carpentry work, and so like I can make a frame, but I can't make a nice one. I mean, you can get a piece of wood and you can route it and create a nice little profile. But if you want to make something really beautiful, you go to somebody that makes beautiful frames. Again, I'm an artist. I make paintings. There are artists that make frames, right? And even if you're buying like pre-made frames, there are artists who design them. That's what they do. They design frames and they make them beautiful so they show off the work in its best light. And so if you can, you want to let those people, you want to take advantage of their skill set. You know, they make frames, use their frames. Yeah, you pay for them, but the benefit of paying for them is you get something of high quality, something really nice, and it makes your work look good, right? A nice frame does wonders for a painting.
I've got another question from Trina. What situation comes up that you would need a glaze?
Glazing, so the question is actually, it's not a proper question for what glazing is. Right? A lot of people will use glazing to correct problems, to fix the things they didn't want to do while they were working opaquely. And that's not what glaze is for. Glaze is an intentional thing built into the process. And so, again, a lot of people will fall back on glazes to fix their mistakes that they didn't want to deal with in the opaque pass. A value is wrong, a color is wrong, and they'll just wait until the glaze until they can get to a point where they can glaze the area, and they'll just fix it there. But glazing isn't meant to do that. It's not meant to be used in a heavy-handed fashion. It's a very delicate thing, and it shouldn't be used to significantly shift values or colors, right? The idea is that it's part of the process. It's part of the decision-making process when you first start. Like, how are you going to get the effects that you want? And so a glaze is going to give you a glow in some things that you're not going to get with other applications. And so when you use it for that, you would use it in a place where you want something to really glow, feel just absolutely luminous. You would plan that well in advance. You'd plan that before the first brushstroke went down, even though it wouldn't be done until the very end of the painting, probably. And so you're planning it early. And with glazing, you actually have to do that. You have to know that you're going to do that with certain areas of the painting before you start painting, because you have to account for the adjustment. Right? So if you want something to be a certain value and a certain color, you have to understand that the glaze is going to make the thing darker, and so let's say you want a green. So maybe you put down a blue opaque and then a yellow glaze. The two together give you a green. It's a yellowish green. If you want a bluish green, the yellow goes down first, the blue goes on top, right? But in the process, you're also dealing with the yellow is only going to make the area one value darker, where the blue might make it 3 values darker. And so you have to know the paint and be able to plan for that. And so in order, when you're doing glazes, it's like being multiple moves ahead in a game of chess. You have to know where you're going before you start painting. And so, obviously for starters, you need to understand how glazing works to be able to use it. You start off very simple when you're learning to use it, and eventually you start to see how doing multiple layers of glaze, how they interact, and what needs to be done earlier on in the painting to prep the painting for such an application. But it's a complicated thing, and there's no single answer other than to say, it's part of your process. It's not like an added thing at the end. It's part of the process. It has to be built into your thinking before the first brush strokes go down. You have to know that that's going to be part of your painting, and you have to have a good sense of where it's going to be a part of your painting, what you're trying to achieve with it. And in that, it's like every other part of your painting. It's just a different application. Yeah, so that's coming together pretty nicely. What time is it?
It is 10:50.
Okay, yeah, so we'll get this done, and we'll call it.
Here's a question.
Yes.
Initially, as a beginner artist, is it all right to give your paintings away to promote your work, or does that seem desperate?
So I wouldn't be giving anything or trying to sell anything until your work is solid, right? Because you get to present yourself to the world as an artist once. And if you present yourself to the world as an amateur with not much to offer, that's how everybody will remember you. And if you present yourself to the world as an artist once you've developed some skill, that people who are, again, not to compete with the big name pros, but that you're producing something that people would respect the ability that you've developed, the skill you've developed, you now have a much better chance of being able to make money at it. And so it's like, you know, you want to make sure that your skills are at a point where people would respect what you do. Once you get there, yeah, give it away, sell it. You know, it's like every place you put it, it potentially brings in business. Now, obviously, you don't want to get into the habit of just giving people your paintings. You know, they have value. They have value. I mean, just in the time that you put into making them, they have value. The materials have value. And so you want to be very careful about just giving your things away. You know, something that is given for free has no value. A very famous saying, right? And so you want to be careful. Even amongst your family and your friends, if you give something to somebody for nothing, how much value does it have? Now, they might like it, but how do they perceive the value, like the financial value of it coming from you when you were able to just give it away? And it's something to think about. You know, human nature is when we get something that it has and it's free, we don't perceive it as having a value at all. Because if it had a value, it wouldn't be free. We don't go into the store and think that milk is going to be free. We know it costs money. There's a cow out in the field and somebody's got to milk the cow. It's got to be moved with a truck. And there's all these things that have to be done so that you can go and buy it. And so when you sit down and do a painting, you've got a lot of work to do. And it's if you don't have a value attached to it, a number, it's very easy for people to perceive that it's nothing. They don't perceive all of the labor, because if you were doing all those things, there'd have to be a price attached to it. You know, and so you want to think like that. And it's not to say don't give your paintings to your friends, you know, and let them enjoy the stuff and hang them on their walls. But you know what you can do if you want to do something like that, rather than giving paintings away, if they're people you know, if they're friends, what you do is you give them the painting on loan. Let them hang the painting in their home if they like it. It does the same thing for you. People get to see the painting, and it gets you some exposure maybe. But at any time, you could take the painting back. Because it has value, you're not just giving it away, but you're letting them hold on to it because you know they like it. That's different. And so that's going to give people a different feel about how you perceive the value of your work. It would be easy to give away, but you don't give it away because it has more value than that, right? And you don't want people to have the impression that it doesn't. Especially the people in your life. You know, the people who you're going to be around, who you need them to like emotionally support you as you do this, right? If the people that are around you that are there for emotional support, brothers and sisters and parents, and if you're just giving your work away, it's very hard for you to get them to eventually see you when you turn the corner as a pro. They'll always see you as a hobbyist. It doesn't matter how much money you're making or to what heights you've taken your work. They'll view you as a hobbyist because that's just the way that things work. You know, they say if you want to become a famous artist, you have to live someplace and sell your work in an area where you don't know anyone and they don't know you. You have to go to another country to do it. And because you can be a celebrity someplace. Where you are, people know you for who you are. And so they never perceive you as something greater. Like I did a gallery show many years ago. This is 23 years ago or so. I had already done the cover for the Rolling Stones. I was doing work with Lucas Arts, and I mean, I was just all over the place. I mean, I had a celebrity status for what I was doing, right? My work was seen all around the world. And so I had this gallery show of illustrations. And some of my mother's friends, people that I had grown up with, they knew me when I was a little kid. They came to the gallery show, and I had one of the ladies. Now, mind you, I was charging a lot of money for these works. They were quite pricey, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a painting. And I had one of the little old lady that I grew up. I used to play piano in her living room. She had a piano, so we learned piano at her house. You know, she came over and she was like, you know, I should buy one of your paintings before you become famous. I'm like, I have 300 published works. I did a cover for the Rolling Stones. I'm already famous. No, you know what I mean, when you're really famous. I actually don't know what you mean, right? It's kind of, you're either famous or you're not. You know, and fame just means that people who don't know you know who you are. right? And I had that all around the world. And so the people who knew me as just Kevin couldn't perceive me as a successful artist because they perceived me as Kevin, the way they knew me as a little kid growing up. They couldn't put that aside to see what I had accomplished with the arts. And so you'll run into that in the areas where you're dealing with people that are close to you. And so the last thing you want to do is contribute to that by giving your work away, just straight up giving it away. Because that's exactly what it'll do. It'll contribute to that idea that, you know, you're just that person they know. You're not somebody who's advancing the skill and is worthy of a higher level of respect for what you're doing, at least with this one thing, with your art. So again, what I found, and I've done this with a lot of people, where I will give them a painting that I know they really like on loan, and that's it. And eventually what happens is I have to get it back from them because somebody bought it. Right? A lot of the illustrations that I did, a lot of my friends, they grabbed them. But I always let them know, like, at some point somebody's going to contact me about buying that piece, and at that time I'll need it back so I can sell it. And I still actually have a couple of illustrations floating out there with family members that people just never contact me about buying. But again, even at this point, I started all of a sudden having people reaching out to me about buying my old illustrations. Like all of a sudden, I'm not even really sure what that's about. I'm not alone in that. A couple of my friends, the same thing. Like all of a sudden, people have become interested in those old book covers and video game covers and things like that. And so I imagine at some point I'll have to pull back some of these paintings that are sitting, they've been sitting on people's walls for 20 plus years. So, but yeah, that would be my advice. To give them on loan if you're doing it with friends and family, with the understanding that at some point you will need them back for the purpose of sale. And I think that if you do that, you'll be, you're not shooting yourself in the foot with how they'll perceive you for what you're doing. And you'll have access to your work, right? It's not like, right, so that's another thing, is that you can then sell it at some point if a buyer comes along. If you give the painting away, it's gone. If you lend it, then if a buyer does come along, you can get the painting back and you can make the sale, right? And that's a good thing. Remember, like, people, as artists, we teach people how to value us. And if we teach them to have little value in what we do, then that's what they'll have. And if we teach them to have a high level of value in what we do, then that's what they'll have, right? It really is up to us. A lot of artists undermine the perception that the people around them have, because they want to get their work out there and they want people to see it and they want to share it and it feels good when somebody likes it. And so they're happy to just kind of let the piece go. So you just want to be thoughtful about that kind of stuff. And again, there's no right answer to this. There's only what you do and you see how you feel, you see how you feel about it, and then if you don't like the way something feels, don't do it again. That's just my experience and what I've done.
Linda Smith, she said, Carly's not for sale, just saying. Yes, Linda, that is yours.
Yeah, no, that's not on loan. That's your painting. Those of you who don't know, I gave away actually two of the portraits that I did in the live streams. We may get back to doing that also in these live streams, some of these paintings I may give away. We are still talking about doing a donation to get a print of this. We'll get that figured out sometime before the painting is done. So that you can, if you're interested in having a copy of this, you can. Again, it'll be a donation. I'm not going to be giving any money to me or to Evolve. It would go entirely to a charity that works with children. And again, we'll have that information. We don't want to send anyone there right now because they're going to set up a special thing that'll be easy to track who makes a donation. And so we're going to wait until they're ready for that before we give their information out. But again, anything that's helping kids is a good thing. I feel like I can stop here. What time is it?
It is 11:04. Oops.
Okay. I'm just going to blur my edge a little bit. I did it up here. And again, like the paint is, I want to drop it.
On that note about not being supported in your hometown, Phoebe shared, my father said I should just take a photo. LOL.
Yeah. You know what? There's no getting away from it. You're going to find it. Even the people that want to be supportive, a lot of them don't know how. Don't take it personally. Do it for you, not for them. I've got no brush marks here.
And another question related to loaning a painting.
Yes.
What would happen if they damaged or lost it?
Well, don't give it to people that you don't know. And if that happens, it happens. Again, if it's family or friends, you hope you're going to give it to people who are going to take care of it. But things happen. I have paintings in my own home that I've damaged. Not intentionally, just stuff happens. But, look, that's life. For the most part, unless the damage is severe, you can fix it. If it's a scratch, that's easy enough to fix. Just have to match some colors and you're good to go. Just paint right over it. And so here, I'm just softening the edge just a little bit. If it's too sharp, the figure's going to look like a cutout. And I don't want that. I want the figure to feel married to the space. And so all I'm doing is taking the edge down ever so slightly. It really is a very, very subtle shift in the edge. Rotate the painting to do the other side. This, actually, I could probably do this. Again, all I'm doing is running the brush over the edge. This is slippery, and so the paint just kind of slips around and thins out as I do this. We've got a lot of room to go in here to bring out the highlights. And you'll see, like when we get to that, we'll do that in 2 weeks. This is going to dramatically change. Those things. It's going to change quickly. Like we'll make a few marks and all of a sudden it'll be like a completely different feel. But that's basically it. That's it for the night.
Yes, we've got one question.
Answered. Yes.
From Iggy. Kevin, what oil paint did you use before Old Holland, and do you use oil paint that isn't Old Holland?
When I was an illustrator, I used Winsor & Newton. And it's fine. From an illustration standpoint, it's fine. But eventually, even as an illustrator, I moved into Old Holland because it's, Old Holland is, for lack of a better way of saying it, Old Holland is Old Holland. You walk into the stores and it's like everything else is just sitting out on the shelf. And it's like this glass case with the, the hole in the ceiling with the sunlight shining down on it. But that's how it feels. And it's like, And it's earned that place. It's earned that place in the world. And if I'm going to work, I want to work. I want to work with the best materials. I don't want to fumble around with something because it's not everything that it could be. And so to me, like, I only work with Old Holland. Ever since I got out of doing illustration, and again, even for a while I was in illustration, I started working with Old Holland. But when I got into doing portraiture, it's the only thing I ever used, and it's just such an incredible material. I never have anything negative to say about it because it delivers over and over and over again. It never falls short. I can never say, hey, it was the paint. If it's a problem, it's me. And that's good. That's good. I don't want the material potentially standing between me and my deliverables, my paintings. So I use the best paint, and again, like, this is what we use for Evolve. We use the best paint. We don't cut any corners on this stuff because it matters. Matters what you work with. Again, it won't make you better, but a cheaper paint can make learning a struggle unnecessarily. So.
And who introduced you to Old Holland?
Oh, you walk into the stores, it's like I said, the sun shining down on it, everything else is like hidden in the shadows. But no, I mean, you walk in and you see it, you know that it's something, something special. You pick up a tube and it feels like a brick. It's like their white paint feels like a brick. It's like a doorstop. And it's like, that it's almost like there's so much pigment in it, there's like a black hole, and they just filled a black hole with pigment, and it's in the tube. That's how it feels. Well, you pick these things up, they've got a heft to them.
Yeah.
So, but it's like I said, it's the material is just, it's the best there is. And if you're gonna do this, like, you do it. Don't half measure it. Like, that's my thinking. And again, we were talking about this very early on, maybe the first or second day that we were working on this painting. You can build out a palette with like 4 or 5 colors. Yeah, Old Holland is still going to be expensive to buy the tubes, but they're going to last you forever. There's so much paint, right? It's not just that the tube is this size and there's paint in it. Relative to other brands of paint, this is so densely pigmented. A 1-inch bead of paint from this company goes on forever. Where, another brand like Winsor Newton, you might need 2 or 3 inches of paint to do the same thing. It's just this paint is, like I said, I can't say enough about it, but just a wonderful material.
And did they reach out to you for Evolve?
Actually, we were introduced through somebody. There was a guy who was connected to both them and me, and he was like, you guys should be working together. And so he made the introduction, and things just went from there. But I tell you, like, when we started having those conversations, Daniel can tell you, I was like giddy. I could not believe that I was having conversations with Old Holland about them. Actually, the original conversations were not about the color paint, but about them making a grayscale for us. I was just like, I couldn't believe that I was having a conversation with the owner of Old Holland about them making a specialty paint for my program. Just, I was on cloud 9. I couldn't believe it. Even now, I pinch myself from time to time. The idea that I have a relationship with this company that produces this incredible product, and that we're able to bring it to our students, because I can tell you, like, very few, no beginner touches this paint. They walk down the aisle in the store and they see the Old Holland, and they're like, ugh, because it seems out of reach. The fact that we're able to give it to our students is just such an incredible thing, and it's Old Holland makes it possible. They have been incredible to us, and to our students, just absolutely incredible. They've made it possible. Just really great stuff. So anyway, anything else?
Last question. Since you don't use a solvent, are you just wiping your brush between color changes, or are you using different brushes for different colors?
Well, these are all very, very similar. And so I'm just wiping the brush just a little bit. I'm not even cleaning, just wiping it. But I've used 4 brushes. That's it 4 brushes. I tried to use one for the, like 2 for this and 2 for this, right? 2 big ones, 2 small ones. So a big one and a small one for each of these 2 colors, and this one, kind of I moved in between with the brushes for that. But yeah, I mean, and these I'll just wash with soap and water when I'm done. And it'll take me 5 minutes. They'll be, all the brushes that I used, take me 5 minutes and they'll be clean with no solvent, nothing toxic, no cancer-causing agents or none of that stuff. So anyway, so
Awesome.
painting is looking great. It's coming along beautifully. We'll be adding one more day onto the process, but very, very happy with where things are. And that's it for the night.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. I know I say this every time, but I know that you could spend your time in other places, and I appreciate you being here with us. So